That's fatal.
This one here is kind of crazy. This one here is kind of crazy. Let's see this one.
When a sudden rise in water traps teenagers in an underground cave, their guide does all he can to save the panicking students. With only a few minutes of air remaining, a catastrophic squeeze through a narrow tunnel will be devastating. This is the fatal breakdown of the Manchester Hole tragedy. An 8th grade overnight trip is the highlight of the year for students at the Tadcaster Grammar School in the United Kingdom.
Hey, grammar
It was
school.
a week of camping, hiking, and caving with their classmates and a few teachers at an outdoor education center run by the county. Joseph, Amy, and Charlie were looking
What do you mean they're not scary? These are terrifying. Yeah, exactly. They're terrifying.
to the freedom of the lush countryside with no parents. They were
I don't mean
13
like
and
monster
14
scary.
years
I mean
old
they're scary
in
as
their
in
last
like
year before
the
high
fuck,
school.
you know?
The Christmas break was
Like
right
being
around the
in that
corner,
position.
and spirits were high with the vigor of youth. The group headed out to Bewerley Park Outdoor Education Center in North Yorkshire. It was just the first day of the long-awaited trip, and the kids were divided into smaller groups to start the first activity. There were nearly 100 students divided into 9 groups. Amy, Charlie, and Joseph were with 8
Facts,
other
EJ.
classmates and their math teacher as the
Period.
adult supervisor. Some groups were off to hike and check out the river. Others would be fishing and rock climbing.
Like, how about let's do
This
anything
group would
but
be going
cave
down
diving.
in the Notterdale cave system for some underground adventure. One of the more interesting
I would stop right there. Right there. Oh, wow, this is cool. Wow. Yeah, very, very cool. Okay. Yep, take care. And back out I go. Right there, I'd stop. Like, motherfucker's going all the way here. Yeah, bro, I'm stopping right there.
some underground adventure. One of the more interesting parts of this cave system was the Manchester Hole.
Yeah, some of those videos, some of those creepy stories, Davey, they're called creepypastas, and a creepypasta is essentially just that. It's a story that is made up, but it's a creepy story told to make it seem like it's a real story. Those are creepypastas.
Looking around on the surface,
Those are fun.
it just looked like a small hole in the ground, but it led to
I
huge
personally
cave
prefer like the
inside.
more real ones,
The camp guide,
or
who
the
would be leading
the
their
mysterious ones that had no
exploration,
explanation.
was a 17-year-old volunteer who had been through all the caves before. One by one, the students lowered themselves into the hole following the guide's instructions. There was a small passageway that led to a huge room. The kids were astonished to see this vast chamber under the ground, when it looked like nothing but a hole in the ground from outside. All 13 members of the group were moving around the room and climbing on rocks.
Oh my god.
The ground was covered in a few inches of water.
That right there is the human. That right there is the human. Like, I'm leaving, bro. You would have loved that, Ross. You know what? You know what? I look at this shit. I always wonder, what the fuck is this shit? Is it slimy? Is it wet? Is it rock solid? Is it salty? Like, what is this? All this shit in the cave. Every time, every cave video, all the caves have this shit.
The kids were astonished. All 13 members of the group were moving around the room and climbing on rocks. The ground was covered in a few inches of water, but they were all
Can you
wearing
suck
their
on
rubber
it?
boots, so it was fun
For
to
research
splash through the
purposes?
puddles and trickles of water. The ceiling in this room vaulted up 50 feet and had stalactite formations growing down from the top in an area nearly the size of a football field. It was an interesting first exposure to caving,
Wait,
and the kids had
Place
gotten
it back
past
up.
their initial anxiety from squeezing down into the hole.
PSN
to
is
get
resorting. What?
after passing through the cave, another tunnel led out of this room into the next. They had to climb down rocks through a muddy path that went down lower and lower underground. After several minutes, the tunnel opened up into another larger room, but nothing like the first one. This room had a lower ceiling and was more narrow, but still plenty
So-
of room for the 11 students to climb around and explore.
Wait,
There was
AJ?
more
Like,
water
fuck.
on the ground, but their boots kept them comfortable as they sloshed through the muddy bottom. Their headlamps were an important tool in this dark
Great
cave.
news!
Some of the
PSN
lamps-
is resorting. What, bro? It's back up. Not back up yet, but it is resorting itself, so I might be up in a jiffy. It's just like, shut the fuck up.
were rather dim, but as a group, they were generating enough light to see the scope of what was around them. Joseph, Charlie, and Amy were feeling excited doing something they had never done before. But that feeling would change when they saw the hole in front of them. The tiny tunnel
Oh,
leading
hell
out of
no.
this room
Hell
wasn't
no.
much more than
No,
a hole
no,
in
no,
the
no.
ground.
Way too
It was only a
claustrophobic for
few
that
feet
shit.
high and quite narrow.
I appreciate the
In order
ant.
to
Thank
make
you,
it to
Ant.
the next room,
Appreciate it.
they would have to crawl on their hands and knees down a tunnel for over 40 feet. The path was irregular and moved left and right. then
Nah,
dipped
like
down
why are
and
you
back
even?
up.
Why?
Some rock formations jutted out into the pathway, but they were able to pass over and around all the obstacles. This tunnel had a muddy stream on the bottom, which got everyone's clothes wet and muddy. They were nervous with the low light and inability to see past the person in front of them, but also exhilarated when they reached the end and were finally able to stand again.
You reached the end of what? Like what now? What now? You're in a fucking hole of water. Where are you going now? Back out where you came from. Like what's the point of that?
The math teacher was behind the last student and encouraged them to follow the guide and move
And what? What if this guy here? What if this guy here gets stuck? This last guy here gets stuck. Now guess what? Now they're all stuck.
along. When he finally reached the end of the tunnel himself, the mood in the room was tense.
Exactly,
The
Dark
guide was
Asian.
worried
I would not
because
want
the
to
water
die like
level was
this.
so high. It was
Yeah,
cold
okay,
and
what
windy
thrill?
outside, but no rain in the forecast.
The only thrill,
He
the only thrill I could see getting is the initial entering the cave and just being like, "Wow, this shit's massive. This is magnificent. This is beautiful. See you later," and then leave.
didn't remember it being this high before. The kids were all standing in knee-deep freezing water, and now there was water in their boots, and nowhere to move to dry ground. They had descended even lower underground, and this room didn't quite have the excitement of the others. They now realized everyone was just standing in a pool of water
Oh, it's
that
filling
actually
up?
seemed to be rising.
Oh no.
At first, the movement of the students kept the water moving around while the guide helped lower them out of the tunnel entrance. Now that everyone was standing together, it was obvious that the level had gone up, over the knee and higher.
Which
on
means
some
they can't
smaller
crawl back
students.
out because its water's
The
rising.
guide was confused and wondering where the water was coming from, but he was certain that they needed to get out of this room before the water got any higher. He sent the teacher back through with the students to follow. He would bring up the rear this time and make sure everyone was safely back in the larger and higher second chamber. One by one, the students moved back through the passage they had just left.
That's fucking wild.
There were parts where it was easy to move, and two students could crawl side by side, but other parts were more narrow or dipped down, requiring them to move one after the other. The teacher and 9 of the students were inside the tunnel when a blast of cold water flooded in. The students in the back were panicked and screaming ahead, telling everyone to go quickly. Some were kneeling in a foot of water, while others were chest deep in the lower sump portion of the tunnel. The water kept coming, and the kids were desperate to get out of this trap.
Yeah,
The teacher
yeah,
quickly
yeah.
moved out of the tunnel.
They should go in with just, you know, they should go in with like a safe way to pass away, like a humane way to pass away if you get stuck. Just pop, heart stops, done.
Tunnel and helped pull the
Like, I ain't
students to
going through all
safety
that,
in the
bro.
open second chamber. The speed with which the water rose was shocking. Several students were stopped before the sump area, knowing they would have to hold their breath and swim through the water-filled section of the tunnel. Everyone was crying and screaming in a shared airspace at the top of the tunnel. Charlie told them that they had to swim through, or they would certainly drown. He was certain that he could hold his breath for at least 2 minutes if he needed to, but was sure that this underwater section couldn't be more than a few feet. He encouraged the others, took a deep breath, and dove under to escape the rising water. Back in the last chamber, there were only 3 people left to enter the tunnel. The guide instructed a tearful Amy that they must swim through the tunnel now, or they would certainly drown. The water had come in a quick pulse, rising up to their shoulders and almost filling the tunnel. Their only means of escape. Joseph, Amy, and their guide were entering the tunnel with very little air remaining. There was a small pocket near the entrance, but they had to hold their breath and dip their heads underwater to pass rocks and stalactites.
Stalactites, that's the
underwater
word.
sections,
Stalactites.
they ran into
That's
bodies
what
of
that's
the
like.
students
Slimy
ahead.
shit looks like. The slimy
The
rock.
guide was planning to catch their
Stalactites.
breath here in the air pocket before swimming through the flooded sump, but there was no room. Students were bunched up here trying to catch their breath and build courage to dive underwater, holding their breath without knowing what they would find on the other side. It was sheer panic, and they were running out of time. Amy and Joseph had no choice but to turn around and go back to the last pocket of air. They were now all the way back in the room where they started. The The water continued to rise, and their guide told them to take a deep breath and get ready to move. There was no time to wait. The water was nearing the ceiling and showed no signs of stopping. The three of them moved to the edge of the air pocket, and with a last gasp of air, they dove under again and moved through the cramped tunnel. This time the other students had cleared, and the guide pushed his face up to get a last breath before going down into the sump.
Wait, so they survived?
Amy and Joseph were right behind him as he plunged
Fucking
down
troopers.
into the tight sump. There were no other air pockets, just a frantic swim for their lives. Amy furiously pulled herself through the tight section and reached around to feel the path. Suddenly a hand roughly grabbed her arm and pulled with such force, she was freed from the sump and dragged through the final stretch of the flooded tunnel by the 17-year-old guide. Joseph was the last to try to catch his breath in the air pocket, but by the time he reached it, there was no air. He may have tried to return to the inner room, but it too was full of water now. The freezing group standing in the second chamber was stunned. The water was still rising, and they had no idea how high it could get. The tunnel was completely full of water, and Joseph was still inside. The guide wanted to go back to see if he could help pull Joseph from the deadly flood, but the teacher stopped him from an impossible task. They still had 10 students to get out of this cave system to safety. Knowing how little air was left when he passed the pocket, the guide clearly understood that Joseph had no air inside. Joseph was dead.
Damn! If only the water went, if only the water resided
to alert emergency
in time.
personnel about the lost student. They were stunned to see blue skies and not a drop of rain on the ground. Where did the water
It must have
come
been like
from?
an overhead river or something.
In an incredibly horrific coincidence, the gusts of wind that had whipped up that day at the Scar House Reservoir had caused an unbelievable torrent of water. Thousands of gallons of water were blown over the dam at the reservoir down into the river below. In just an hour, the river rose 4 feet, and this water drains directly down through the cave system below. Normally, this water would trickle through and continue on to the groundwater below. In this case, the quantity of water pushed into the cave overwhelmed its draining capacity. Water had filled the entire system in a flash flood in just a
So that
few
one person
minutes.
didn't survive, yeah.
Rescue teams were at the cave within 20 minutes of being called, but the scene had drastically changed in that time. The water level had receded to below the knee, and the team was able to make their way into the tunnel leading to the final chamber. There they found the lifeless body of Joseph Lister. What should have been an amazing trip for the class left kids traumatized, and one dead. Negligence charges were brought against the county council that operated the outdoor center for not checking the status at the reservoir before entering the cave. They were eventually found not guilty on those charges, since this accident was not expected and could not have been foreseen.
Do they show the pictures
It
of
was a
them?
tragic accident, which took the life of a bright student, before his life could truly begin.
Damn, that's... Hell no! Fuck all that shit, what the hell?